This video is going to cover everything you need to know to start recording your own music. We'll be looking at audio interfaces, DAWs, and the different ways that you can record different instruments. In its most basic form, all you're going to need is your instrument, a way to connect your instrument to a computer, and then some software that you can use to record all of your music. Now, what computer should you use? I've used both a Mac and my Lenovo laptop, which I have right here, so both Windows and Mac OS, and although it pains me to say it, Apple computers are just superior when it comes to music production and content creation. To connect your instrument to the computer, to then start recording into your DAW, you need one of these. This is called an audio interface. I've got the Focusrite Scarlett Solo, which is a pretty industry standard beginner audio interface. We'll talk about audio interfaces and DAWs in more detail later on in the video, but for now, on the back of the interface, you've got an output to connect into your computer. On the front, we have got a microphone or XLR cable input, so we can use that for our microphones, and then I've also got an instrument input, which I can use for my electric guitar, and my drum kit or the piano as well. I can also plug in my headphones, and I've got gain control, which just means I'm not peaking the audio and distorting any of the sound. Just to summarize, you'll obviously need your instrument, but then we have the audio interface to connect your instrument to the computer. You need a computer of some description, probably a Mac would be best, and then a DAW to record all of your music into, and then edit and mix your song. The software we use is called a DAW, or Digital Audio Workstation. Most of the DAWs will have different versions of their software, from the light version all the way through to their pro version. With the light version, you get a certain amount of functions, and it should be a free use of the software. Then your pro version will more often than not be a paid subscription. The pro version of a DAW will give you access to all of the features that the software comes with. This will be things like effects, amplifiers, different instrument sounds. You can have EQs, pitch correction, auto-tune stuff, a lot of really useful features, but it does of course come with a price. I'm not a big fan of subscriptions. I'd much rather just buy the product or the software, in this case outright, than pay an annual fee to have use of someone else's product. And the best DAW that I found that wasn't subscription based, that was good looking, pretty simple to use, and had a good amount of features for a relatively low price, I found PreSonus Studio One 6. I've made a couple of videos on the DAWs, so check those out for a full sort of tutorial, I guess, of how to use the DAW. I'll link those videos into the description to get a more in-depth view of the DAW, but for now we'll do a quick little overview so you can get started with recording the instruments. Plugging the interface back into the computer, we can now focus on setting up our DAW and getting everything ready to start recording. So here's the open page of the interface. Just need to click here for new, and this will bring up this page. I'll title it How to Record a Video. And here is our workstation. We go through all of this in those videos that I mentioned a little bit before, so I won't go through them now, but we can add some tracks. I think 6 might be enough. I could just do it there, but you know, I know keyboard shortcuts. We can rename our tracks. I might just do that now. Guitar left, right, piano, drums, bass guitar, and then electric guitar. The most important thing you need to do with your DAW, that should be the first step, is select your recording and playback device. So now we're going to be recording through the interface. So what I need to do is go to my song setup, which is over here, song setup, and then choose my audio I/O, or input versus output settings. When I was running my DAWs off of my Windows computer, I couldn't change these settings individually. I can only choose one as the playback and recording device. It wasn't until I got my Mac that I was able to individually choose these as my playback, or the output, my recording, or the input devices. I'll talk about all of this in my DAW videos, so check those out again if you're interested. Unless I'm using a microphone to record, I will always have my speakers from my computer as my playback device until I get to the mixing stage, when I want to be using my headphones. So until we get to the mixing stage, we'll be using the speakers from my computer to record everything, unless I'm using my microphones, there's no bleeding of the sounds. But for the recording device, I need to make sure that my interface is what is selected. So Scarlett 2i2, make sure I have that, and then go back to my song setup, which is where we were at before, and make sure the inputs have been selected. As I showed you before with the interface, we've got 2 inputs, which means I need to have 2 inputs available on the DAW. There's 2 different types of inputs. You've got stereo and mono. Simply put, if I'm using 2 different microphones to record my acoustic guitar, in mono what will happen is those 2 sounds will come together to make one. In stereo, both of them will be separate, and I can have 2 separate recordings. All I have to do is make sure that these are selected there. This means that my input left is actually on input left, and my input right is actually on input right. If I plug this in there, I want to be using input left. The computer in here is talking to there, so it's just making sure everything matches up. When I go to use my electric guitar and I record through my amplifier, what I'll do is I'll switch to my Boss Katana as my recording device, which will change that. If I go back to song setup, I'll have these extra inputs. That's because I've got a dry versus wet signal, which just means affected tones versus non-affected tones. But going back to the interface, we can keep that. Go to song setup, make sure everything is saved, click OK. And then if we go to our tracks, we have mute, and then solo, which is everything else gets muted. And then if I want to enable a certain track to start recording, I just need to click the record button there, and then I can start my recording. And there we go. If I show you a recent project, we'll go songs. Here we go. This is a song that I did a couple of days ago. It is whatever. I'm using it as background music for all my YouTube videos. I'm going to actually make a video out of that, so stay tuned for those. You can see here the sound waves, and I can zoom in really close and see all the individual waves like that, and we can edit them as we wish and add effects and mix and do everything that we need to in the DAW. We're not really going to go through that because this is more specific to how to record your instruments rather than how to mix and edit them, but I might make a video about how to mix properly. But again, I've got a whole thing about how to use the DAW and how to get everything edited, and a brief little how to mix for a beginner and make it sound good. Before we move on, I just want to go over the 3 main setups that we can use to record our instruments. I'll lay them out individually on my bed and then walk you through them. The simplest way to record our instruments is going to be specific to electrical instruments such as my drum kit and piano. All we need to do is use a cable such as a guitar lead to plug our instrument directly into the audio interface, which will then be plugged into our computer running the DAW. For all of these setups, we of course have the option to connect our headphones to play back our music. The second way that we can record is acoustically. We have our instruments, whether that be an acoustic guitar or something like an acoustic kit, which will be mic'd up. Using XLR cables, we can connect these mics into our audio interface, which will again be plugged into our computer running the DAW. Another way we can record is by miking up an amplifier. We connect an instrument like an electric bass into our amp, and similarly to the acoustic recording setup, we use our microphones but focus on the amp. As before, we connect our mics to the interface using XLR cables. We can then record through the interface into our DAW on the computer. With that done and the DAW already set up, we can move on to recording some drums.